February 20, 1944, early morning, the cold hangs low over eastern England. Frost clings to metal wings as ground crews step back from spinning propellers. One by one, heavy bombers begin to move. B-17s, B-24s, their engines thunder into the grey dawn, shaking the airfields awake. Inside the cockpits, oxygen masks are checked, maps are unfolded. Germany lies hundreds of miles away. Across the channel, in concrete bunkers and converted schoolhouses, German radar operators watch their scopes fill with familiar shapes. Large formations, high altitude, American bombers again. Nothing unusual at first, then something doesn't fit. Smaller blips appear where they should not, too far east, too deep, too steady, fighters still with the bombers, not turning back. Over the North Sea, long, narrow silhouettes form up beside the heavy aircraft, sleek, silver, with laminar wings catching the weak winter light, P-51 Mustangs. For the first time, American fighters are not peeling away at the German border, they are staying. As the formations press onward toward the Reich, a quiet realization begins to spread through German command channels. This raid is different, and it will not end the way the others did. That realization opens the door to how the air war reached this moment. The air war before Big Week. By the end of 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a dangerous stalemate. The United States Army Air Forces believed deeply in daylight precision bombing. It was not simply a tactic, but a doctrine. American planners argued that heavily armed bombers flying in tight formations could defend themselves, strike specific industrial targets, and cripple Germany's ability to wage war. Factories, refineries, ball-bearing plants hit them accurately, repeatedly, and the enemy would collapse from within. Reality had been far less forgiving. From airfields in England and North Africa, B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 liberators pushed deep into occupied Europe. They flew high, slow, and predictable routes toward targets that German defenses had spent years preparing to protect. Flak belts ringed cities. Radar stations tracked formations from the coast inward. Interceptor airfields were placed precisely where bombers were forced to pass. German fighters did not need to hunt, they waited. The Luftwaffe's defensive system, shaped earlier in the war under General Joseph Kammhuber, channeled bombers into controlled killing zones. Radar detected incoming raids. Ground controllers guided fighters directly into formation boxes. Heavy anti-aircraft guns broke cohesion. Then fighters attacked, losses mounted with brutal consistency. In October 1943, the USAAF launched deep raids against Schweinfurt and Regensburg, aiming to cripple Germany's ball-bearing production. The missions reached their targets, but at a cost that stunned even seasoned commanders. Dozens of bombers were shot down in a single day. Entire crews vanished over Germany. Survivors returned with empty gun positions and blood frozen along the fuselage. The message was unmistakable. Bombers could reach Germany, but they could not survive there alone. American fighter escort doctrine lagged behind bomber ambition. Early escorts, P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, were powerful but limited by fuel. Over Germany, they simply could not stay. Fighters peeled away at predictable points, leaving bombers exposed during the most dangerous phase of every mission. German pilots knew the moment. Once escorts turned back, the bombers were theirs. The Luftwaffe adapted quickly. Head-on attacks became standard, exploiting the bombers' weakest defensive arcs. Rocket-armed interceptors shattered formations before gunners could respond. New tactics were brutal, efficient, and relentlessly practiced. For bomber crews, the psychological toll was immense. Every mission briefing included casualty lists from the previous day. Survival was calculated not in years but in sorties. Many crews believed they would not complete their required tour. Some stopped writing letters home altogether, yet the pressure did not ease. In Washington and London, Allied planners understood that strategic bombing was essential, not optional. A cross-channel invasion was coming, and Germany's aircraft industry had to be broken before Allied soldiers ever set foot on the beaches of France. What the air war needed was not more bombers. It needed protection that could reach the heart of Germany and stay there. That need would quietly reshape American strategy and force a fundamental change in how the air war would be fought. The solution to the escort problem did not arrive with fanfare. It arrived through engineering choices, quiet testing, and a willingness to abandon assumptions. The aircraft that would transform the air war was already flying, but not yet understood. The North American P-51 Mustang began its life not as a long-range escort, but as a compromise. Designed rapidly in 1940 to meet a British requirement, the early Mustang was efficient, fast at low altitude, and unremarkable above it. Its Allison engine limited high-altitude performance, making it unsuitable for escorting bombers over Germany. Then came a decision that changed everything. British engineers proposed fitting the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The Merlin transformed the aircraft, high-altitude performance surged, fuel efficiency improved, speed increased. Ceiling expanded. The Mustang could now climb with bombers, fight with interceptors, and critically, fly farther than any American fighter before it. With the addition of external drop tanks, the P-51's range expanded beyond what German planners believed possible. This was not merely a technical upgrade, it enabled a doctrinal revolution. Until early 1944, escort fighters were shackled to the bombers. Their task was to stay close, discourage attack, and then leave when fuel demanded it. The bomber formations remained the center of gravity. Fighters were defensive tools. That doctrine was quietly overturned. Under the leadership of General James Doolittle, newly appointed commander of the 8th Air Force, escort fighters were given a new mission: destroy the Luftwaffe itself. Fighters were no longer required to orbit bombers. They were free to range ahead, above, and beyond the formations, seeking combat on their own terms. The goal was no longer simply to protect bombers for a single mission. The goal was to break German fighter strength permanently. By early 1944, the timing aligned. Allied aircraft production surged. Pilot training pipelines matured. Intelligence reports indicated that German fighter output, while impressive on paper, was increasingly brittle, short on fuel, experienced pilots, and replacement crews. Operation Argument, soon known as Big Week, was conceived to force the issue. From February 20 to February 25, 1944, the Allies would launch sustained, large-scale attacks against Germany's aircraft industry, airframe plants, engine factories, assembly lines. The intention was to compel the Luftwaffe to fight, in daylight, over its own territory. This time the bombers would not be alone. German planners believed they understood American limits. They expected escort fighters to fall away as always. Their defense plans were built on that assumption. Big Week would expose just how wrong that assumption had become. And when the missions began, the consequences would unfold not only in the sky, but inside the minds of the men ordered to defend the Reich. For American bomber crews, Big Week began with a difference they could feel before they fully understood it. As formations assembled over England, fighters did not peel away at the usual points. The Mustangs stayed in position as the coastline disappeared beneath the wings. Hours passed, fuel gauges dropped, but the escorts remained. Inside the bombers, tension shifted subtly. Gunners watched fighters move ahead instead of turning back. Radio chatter changed tone. Crews still faced flak, still faced interception, but for the first time the sense of abandonment eased. Veteran crews noticed the change immediately. German fighters no longer attacked with the same freedom. Interceptors approaching the bomber boxes now had to fight their way through escorts first. Attacks were disrupted. Formations were broken before they reached firing range. Survival no longer felt like a statistical illusion, it felt possible. That shift did not eliminate fear, it altered it. The P-51 Mustang did not dominate the sky through brute force alone, it dominated through endurance. With laminar flow wings, a supercharged Merlin engine, and external drop tanks, the Mustang could accompany bombers from English airfields to central Germany and back. It could climb to bomber altitude, cruise efficiently, and still fight at the end of a mission. German intelligence had not fully accounted for this capability. Defensive planning assumed escort limits based on earlier American fighters. Radar coverage, interception timing, and fuel calculations all relied on those assumptions. When Mustangs appeared deep inside Germany, the entire defensive rhythm collapsed. The Mustang's presence was not just tactical, it was disruptive. Inside Luftwaffe command centers, confusion spread quickly. Reports contradicted expectations. Fighters were being engaged far beyond previous escort boundaries. Interceptors were burning fuel before reaching bombers. Losses were occurring earlier in missions, before German pilots could concentrate attacks. Some commanders believed the reports were exaggerated. Others suspected temporary experiments, but the pattern repeated. The Americans were no longer playing by the old rules. German pilots felt it in the air. Where once they could choose the moment of engagement, now they were hunted. Mustangs ranged ahead, attacking airfields, catching fighters during climb-out, forcing engagements under unfavorable conditions. The psychological balance shifted. Defending the Reich had always meant reacting. Now it meant surviving long enough to fight at all. Those changes were only the beginning, and deeper forces, doctrinal, tactical, and personal, were about to collide. The most profound change during Big Week was not visible from the ground. It was doctrinal. For the first time, American fighter escorts were no longer chained to bomber formations. Under Doolittle's orders, P-51 pilots were encouraged to fly aggressively, ranging miles ahead of the bombers, sweeping known interceptor routes, and striking German fighters before they could organize. This tactic reversed years of Luftwaffe advantage. German interceptors traditionally climbed, formed up, and attacked as coordinated units. During Big Week, many never reached that stage. Mustangs intercepted them while climbing when engines were stressed and speed was limited. Others were caught returning to base, low on fuel and ammunition. The bomber stream became a secondary battlefield. The primary fight moved outward, over airfields, assembly points, and transit corridors. German fighters were being forced into combat on American terms, not their own. General James Doolittle's influence during Big Week cannot be overstated. Unlike earlier commanders, Doolittle accepted short-term bomber losses if it meant long-term destruction of German fighter strength. His objective was not to protect every bomber, it was to eliminate the Luftwaffe as a fighting force before the invasion of Western Europe. On the German side, leadership was fragmented. Goering's authority had eroded, fuel shortages limited training, experienced pilots were irreplaceable, orders often conflicted: defend factories, defend cities, preserve forces, fight aggressively. The result was hesitation layered on exhaustion. The Luftwaffe entered Big Week already strained. It would not leave intact. Perhaps the most devastating impact was psychological. German pilots had once believed the Reich's airspace was theirs. They had learned bomber routes, altitudes, habits. They had controlled the tempo of battle. Now they were reacting constantly. Mustangs appeared where none were expected. Escorts did not disengage. American fighters followed German aircraft home. Airfields were no longer safe, even landing became dangerous. Confidence eroded quickly. Pilots who survived multiple engagements reported a growing sense of inevitability. Losses were no longer occasional, they were constant. The idea of turning the tide faded quietly, replaced by a struggle to endure. That erosion would soon reach a breaking point, as Big Week's air battles surged toward their most decisive moments. The first morning of Big Week opens without drama on the ground, then the sky fills. On February 20, 1944, more than 1,000 Allied bombers lift from airfields across England. Their targets are clear: aircraft assembly plants at Leipzig, Bernburg, Oschersleben, and Brunswick. These are not symbolic raids. These factories feed Germany's fighter force directly. German radar stations detect the formations early. Orders move fast. Fighter units scramble from bases across the Reich, but the timing is wrong. As German aircraft climb to altitude, Mustangs are already waiting. P-51s appear ahead of the bomber stream, high and fast. Others move laterally, sweeping expected interception corridors. German formations that would normally assemble unchallenged are intercepted in fragments. Some are forced into combat while still climbing. Others scatter before they can form. The bombers continue east. Flak still rises over targets. That has not changed. But the fighter threat, the sharpest edge of German air defense, is dulled before it reaches the bomber boxes. On February 21, the pattern repeats. Again, bombers penetrate deep into Germany. Again, escorts remain. This time, Mustangs push even farther, engaging fighters near their home airfields. Several German units report losses before making contact with bombers at all. Fuel becomes a silent enemy. German fighters burn precious reserves maneuvering defensively. Engagements that once lasted minutes stretch longer as pilots attempt to disengage from faster, longer-ranging escorts. Many never reach the bombers. Others reach them late, alone, and outnumbered. American losses continue, but the balance shifts. Bomber formations that would previously have been shredded now arrive with cohesion intact. Gunners fire less often. Fighters absorb the brunt of combat. By February 22, German command realizes the scale of the problem. This is not a single raid, it is sustained pressure. The Luftwaffe is being forced to fight, day after day, without time to recover. Each sortie costs pilots Germany cannot replace. Each engagement favors an enemy that grows stronger with every mission. Still, German orders remain firm. The aircraft industry must be defended, so the Luftwaffe commits again, and in that commitment the decisive fracture begins to form. By February 23, the air war over Germany no longer follows familiar patterns. Allied bombers return in force, striking aircraft plants at Regensburg, Augsburg, Stuttgart and Schweinfurt. These are places already scarred by earlier raids, now targeted again with precision and persistence. The Luftwaffe rises to meet them because it must. What meets the German fighters this time is not a defensive screen, but a moving wall of escorts. Mustangs, Thunderbolts and Lightnings operate in depth, some remain close to the bombers. Others roam freely, attacking wherever German aircraft appear. Engagements erupt across the sky, not just near the bombers but far beyond them. German pilots report being intercepted repeatedly, sometimes 3 or 4 times during a single sortie. Survival depends less on skill than on fuel and chance. Many aircraft are lost during disengagements, caught low and slow as they attempt to reach home. On February 24, attrition peaks. Entire German units report catastrophic losses. Veteran pilots, men with dozens of victories, fail to return. Replacement pilots enter combat with minimal training and no tactical depth. The Luftwaffe's carefully built experience base collapses under the weight of continuous combat. The Americans absorb losses too. Bombers fall to flak. Fighters are shot down in swirling engagements. But the difference is arithmetic. The United States can replace aircraft and crews. Germany cannot. By February 25, the pattern is unmistakable. German fighter response weakens. Interceptions become sporadic. Bombers reach targets with fewer challenges. Escorts range even farther, attacking airfields and catching aircraft during landing approaches. Inside German command, the realization settles without ceremony. The defensive system has failed. Big Week does not destroy Germany's aircraft industry outright. Production continues. Factories disperse. Repairs begin almost immediately, but something far more important has been broken: the Luftwaffe's ability to contest the sky. What follows is not an immediate collapse, but a slow, irreversible consequence that will shape every Allied operation that comes next. When the final formations of Big Week return to England, the numbers begin to speak. Over 6 days of sustained operations, the Luftwaffe suffers losses that cannot be hidden by propaganda or accounting. Hundreds of German fighter aircraft are destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair. More critical than the machines are the men. Experienced pilots, flight leaders, instructors, squadron veterans are gone. These are losses that Germany cannot replace with speed or quality. American losses are heavy but survivable. Bombers are shot down, crews are killed or captured, yet the survival rate of formations improves measurably compared to late 1943. Escort fighters absorb combat that bombers once faced alone. Inside German units, the impact is immediate. Squadrons return with gaps where leaders once flew. Replacement pilots arrive with fewer hours, less combat training, and shrinking fuel allocations. Training programs are shortened, standards are lowered. The Luftwaffe begins to consume itself simply by staying operational. Fuel shortages compound the damage. By early 1944, aviation fuel is already scarce. Big Week accelerates the crisis. Fighters forced into repeated interceptions burn reserves Germany cannot afford to replace. Training flights are cut back further. Tactical proficiency erodes even faster. American airmen notice the change. Opposition becomes uneven. Some missions encounter fierce resistance. Others encounter little at all. The Luftwaffe is still dangerous but no longer reliable. It cannot concentrate force consistently. It cannot dictate terms. Strategically, this shift matters more than any single factory destroyed. For the first time, Allied planners can consider air superiority not as a future goal, but as an approaching reality. That reality will soon reshape how the war in Europe is fought, on the ground, at sea, and in the air. By the end of Big Week, on February 25, 1944, the strategic landscape of the air war over Europe had shifted irreversibly. Germany's aircraft industry remained operational, but the Luftwaffe that defended it was weakened beyond immediate repair. Veteran pilots, men who had once flown with confidence and precision, were gone. Replacement pilots arrived inexperienced, often untested in actual combat conditions. Training programs could not produce them fast enough, and attrition continued even after Big Week concluded. The impact on operational doctrine was severe. German commanders were forced into defensive hesitation. Aggressive tactics were curtailed to preserve remaining aircraft. Fighter units could no longer mass effectively, and coordination suffered under the strain of constant losses. The Kammhuber line, once a rigid defensive network, became porous. Radar still detected raids, but there were fewer fighters to intercept formations effectively. Meanwhile, Allied morale soared. Bomber crews who had once faced almost certain danger deep inside Germany now sensed the difference. Escort fighters made survival statistically more likely, enabling crews to complete their tour. Confidence, though hard-won, returned to the bomber ranks. Leaders like General Doolittle and General Spaatz recognized that the combination of long-range fighters and relentless bombing had created leverage Germany could not counter. The lessons of Big Week extended far beyond aircraft counts. The Luftwaffe's decline accelerated the path to Allied air supremacy, a prerequisite for the planned invasion of Western Europe in June 1944. By weakening the Luftwaffe and proving that escort fighters could operate deep inside Germany, the Allies could now plan operations with reduced risk of catastrophic bomber losses. Ground campaigns, amphibious assaults, and supply line operations all became more feasible under the protective shadow of American fighters. Historically, Big Week is remembered not just as a series of raids, but as the moment when the psychological and structural advantage in the air passed to the Allies. It marked the beginning of the end for German air dominance over Europe, a quiet revolution measured in metal, fuel, and human endurance. And this shift, forged in the cold skies over Germany, would echo across every battlefield that followed. Big Week did not destroy Germany overnight, nor did it end the war in the air immediately. What it achieved was more profound. It altered the rules of engagement, the psychology of combat, and the trajectory of the European air war. The introduction of long-range P-51 Mustangs changed everything. Bombers were no longer isolated, and the Luftwaffe's mastery of its own skies began to crumble. For the men flying on both sides, it was a harsh lesson in adaptation. Experienced pilots were lost, while new crews learned that survival now depended on more than skill, it depended on innovation and timing. Strategically, the campaign demonstrated how technology and doctrine, working in concert, could shift the balance of power. The combination of precision bombing, long-range fighter escort, and aggressive leadership created a ripple effect, weakening German defenses, conserving Allied resources, and shaping the conditions for the Normandy invasion months later. Yet beyond the statistics and industrial calculations, there was a human story. Fear, courage, endurance, and shock intertwined in the sky over Germany. Pilots faced death hundreds of miles from home, and those who survived returned changed, not just in skill but in outlook. The air war became not only a battle of machines, but a test of human resilience and adaptation under unprecedented conditions. In the end, Big Week was a turning point because it proved a simple, enduring truth of warfare. Control of the sky requires more than aircraft, it requires vision, innovation, and the courage to defy expectations. The echo of those frozen winter skies in 1944 continues to remind history that technological advantage, properly applied, can reshape not just battles, but the fate of nations. And so, the roar of Mustang engines over Germany became more than a sound, it became a signal. The air war had changed forever.